For people that don't want to give up the foods that they love, what are the best tricks and tactics to still eat the foods that you love while also losing weight?
Absolutely. So I think the foods that you love is also related to the relationship with those foods that you have. So I think a lot of times we're very focused on what you're eating, but what is almost as important is how you're eating it. So I'd be really focused on posture during eating. I'd be really focused on pacing, the environment with what you're eating, because stress itself or having that kind of negative interaction with food is going to alter your digestion, your nervous system, and all these things that are going to ultimately change your metabolism too. So the first thing I would say is change how you're interacting with food and how you're eating.
You want your food to make you feel good.
Absolutely.
What do you think about this idea that you should never feel guilt about unhealthy food choices?
I like that you use the word guilt specifically, because having guilt about anything does not usually produce positive results, right? So I would say that having guilt about something is not a way to push you forward. And either way, if you had it already, the best thing to do would be to quickly move on. And we can talk about tips for doing that as well, and change kind of the trajectory as opposed to sitting and dwelling in it, even though the foods that we eat do really matter also.
Yeah. I mean, I feel this way when I tend to overindulge, which doesn't happen all the time, but occasionally your boy overindulges and I don't feel so great afterwards. Yeah. Who does? And I do feel guilty about that, that occasional habit that I have. But I feel like we live in a time now where, everybody needs to be so coddled. And it's like, no, you should never feel guilt about your choices or anything. But I feel like in a way, guilt is an adaptive, normal human emotion. And if it helps you course correct,
sure,
as long as you're not like hating yourself and shaming
100%.
Yourself.
Right. Shame is the key word there. So I think a healthy amount of, hey, I really shouldn't have done that is a good thing. If it turns into self-judgment or really self-characterizations, that's when you get into a risky territory. So if you say, hey, I don't feel good when I do this and I'm not doing it again, you can almost hear the assertiveness and the honesty in that voice versus like, oh my God, I can't believe I did that. I'm such a bad person. It feels totally different. So if it's coming from that authentic, real you, that logical, real you, I think you can roll with that voice. But if it's something that's coming from this more fearful side of you, you're going to end up going towards that thing again. And that can actually lead to restrictive and then ultimately binging behavior. So I definitely can say it's worth it to acknowledge when you've done something and not harp on it and attack yourself as a person from it.
Yeah, not let it become something that you're ruminating over. And
absolutely.
Yeah. What would you say are some of the biggest misconceptions about nutrition that you encounter day to day on social media and beyond?
Well, I think if we divide the nutrition world into kind of different nutritional camps that we see, I have myth busting for each camp, I would say. So in the really hardcore fitness bro category, just focusing on calories and not focusing on anything else, even though calories are a piece of the equation, and not focusing on how the machine of your body is running and how those calories are going in or being expended, I think that's a huge myth that constantly needs to be busted. And then when it comes to the more aggressive kind of body positive group, I think the idea that intuitive eating can be a psychological solution for physical problems needs to be debunked because it can't be.
What is intuitive eating?
So intuitive eating is a set of 10 principles that are actually fantastic, and they really help people to access their own hunger cues and understand how they feel around eating, and is a really good kind of set of principles to help people to develop a stronger or more neutral relationship with food, let's say. For that reason, I think intuitive eating is fantastic. When intuitive eating turns into it can cure diabetes, it can cure other conditions, is where I start to get wary, and I see that on social media quite a bit.
Yeah, and but what is the central crux of it? That you should just trust the signals and the hunger cues that your body is giving you, and that all foods are sort of on equal playing field?
So in a good way, no, that's not what it is. It is really a set of principles to understand how you feel when food is in front of you, how to access and understand your own nervous system around food, and how to eat from a position of peace, I would say. And it's not really eat whatever you want, which is, we see this kind of fringe community, which I call the all foods fit community, where that is the belief that it's like, to heal your relationship with food, you have to eat unhealthy foods and not restrict yourself, which is a huge concern for me, I believe.
Yeah. There's this interesting back and forth that you see sometimes on social media, where you'll see some in the dietetic space push back to the notion that there are bad foods, there are good foods. Like food has no moral value. And I get that to a certain degree, particularly for people who have had, who have created moral associations
100%.
With food, right?
Of course. But that's obvious, Max.
Yeah.
We don't have to say that part of it, right? That we shouldn't say if we eat this food, we're a bad person. Taking the moral associations out of food is really important as they attach to the person. But I can make a moral association and say, like, Oreos suck. That's fine. I don't really care about shaming food companies. I'd never shame a person for eating it, but I'll shame a food company. I don't care at all.
What would you say, like, obviously we live in a time predominated with regard to the food environment by ultra-processed foods, highly processed, hyper-palatable foods. And in fact, I think the latest statistics I've seen, 73% of your average supermarket now is comprised of, stocked with like these ultra-processed foods. Are there any in particular that you think are, I guess, particularly risky, dangerous?
Yeah, I would say things that you really unconsciously consume because of how they're particularly packaged to you. So things that have a beautiful, perfect combination of hydrogenated oils or really omega-6 laden, which is very controversial now, as you know, too, omega-6 laden combined with a lot of corn syrups or other sugars. That combination together, having the capacity to light up your brain, can really kind of put your body into overdrive and take control over what your choices are, which is the point of them. And as you know so well, what food companies are intending to do with those.
Create repeat customers.
Exactly.
Yeah, I totally get it. There's definitely like a ton of diet tribes on social media. There's like the carnivore tribe, you see the vegan tribe, you see but I think even to some degree, like the evidence-based community on social media is just as tribalistic. And just as prone to groupthink and Dunning-Kruger and misinformation. Maybe not misinformation, but like...
Well, they call out misinformation, the obsession of calling out misinformation.
That's what it is. And but you know, sometimes the problem that I have with it is often that nutrition science, it's so weak, generally speaking. Like exactly. the best study is going to be the one that you perform yourself, your own N of 1 experiment.
Exactly.
And I think there's at times overemphasis on what is ultimately really weak nutrition data.
It's observational studies, right? And it's observational studies that are really hard to control also. You know, I have a friend who's a PhD and she studies like how strawberries influence like one component of your endothelium, like, you know, the tiniest little thing. And it takes her like 7 years to do, you know, that one study. And I do think it's incredibly important. And we love nutrition research. You wrote an entire book using ample nutrition research, but it can't be the bedrock and the gold standard for what we do in treatment and care. I've worked with thousands of clients over 10 years of being a dietitian, and no one of my clients experiences foods in the same way. Because food doesn't exist in isolation. It exists in the environment of our body, in the environment of our lives. So it's not just like you put food in and then it's going to look the same inside these really complex bodies. So really any nutritional camp doesn't apply to anyone. It only matters what, you know, N of 1, like you would say, in our bodies matters.
Do you think like social media is helpful or ultimately harmful to our relationship with food?
I think what concerns me a lot about it is like people going down the wrong path. So if I have a client who is on the cusp of having diabetes, let's say as an example, this has actually happened, and they feel like they have a really poor relationship with food where they are in a restriction binge cycle, their inclination might be to go towards a health at every size practitioner or an intuitive eating practitioner, when that actually is there's a really tight time frame. If you're in the pre-diabetic range, you might like it can cascade an avalanche really quickly. So there has to be priorities. And I think people who are looking for information need to look based on the priority of what's important to them. So if you have pre-diabetes, but you feel like you have a poor relationship with food, you have to ask yourself, what's the priority for me right now? If you have a deadly eating disorder, and they can absolutely be deadly and lethal, that might be the first path for you. But you have to ask, what's my priority right now before engaging in social media? Yeah.
The standard American diet is an eating disorder.
Yeah, it's so true. And it's so interesting because that all foods fit community that I was talking about, I said, if you kind of looked at foods as they were 100 years ago, everyone would look like they were restricting if we were just consuming food that way, which is kind of what we're proposing, is to go back to something like 100 years ago. But if you look at all foods that are available and you cut out 90% of them, because probably 90% of them aren't really fit for human consumption anyway, it looks like you're restricting 90%, but you're really just eating the 10% that's food instead of food commodities.
Yeah, and they're highly addictive. There was a review article that I saw. I shared it on X a couple days ago that said that if you apply the same criteria that we use to determine the highly addictive nature of tobacco and cigarettes to food, it's abundantly clear that ultra-processed foods are just as addictive. But we're
like not allowed to say that though.
Yeah.
Food companies really have it made. I just have to tell you, because I don't know how they made it so that there's dietitians who are saying it's okay if you eat these products. I saw a dietitian recently drinking a Frappuccino that had 70 grams of sugar in it and saying, this healed my relationship with food. When I released restrictions, this was the thing that healed my relationship with food. And I'm like, how lucky is Starbucks? Because this dietitian is promoting their like super sickening product. It's unbelievable.
Yeah. And there was recently, what do you make of that? There was that headline, article, expose really, that came out, was published by the Washington Post.
About the sugar stuff?
Yeah, the artificial sweeteners, dietitians were being paid off by the American Beverage Association to go to bat for aspartame.
Yeah, it was extremely disturbing. I think we shared each other's posts on that, by the way. I think we were like,
we
were riled up. Yeah, exactly. I think we were, because I will say this. There is this like trope that dietitians are paid by big food, and no one's like getting, I thought that was a trope, by the way, to be honest with you. I was actually shocked because I don't really know any dietitians who are getting paid by big food directly. Is it embedded in our curriculum potentially? Yes. Do I have concerns about that? Yes. But I didn't think people were legitimately pocketing money to change their recommendations, but it appears that it seemed very true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they weren't adequately making those disclosures.
No.
In a way that was truly transparent, to the degree that many of them they were warned by the FTC.
Can we zoom out and realize how wild that is, that people, I mean, it's the same thing with pharmaceutical companies and food companies, that we are in a position where recommendations can actually like legally be altered by bribery. It's unbelievable. I mean, it's really the way of America and a bunch of other industries as well, as we know.
Well, what's your take? So see, these are some of the more controversial, I guess, food groups on social media today, particularly with the dominance of, I guess, the wellness industry and food, groups like artificial sweeteners, or like ingredients like artificial sweeteners, natural flavors and things like that. Do any of them concern you, or do you think it's ultimately like a dose makes the poison situation?
I definitely dose makes the poison. And I also feel like I have to focus on, with clients, heavy hitters. And I don't know that artificial sweeteners alone are driving the issues that my clients have. But if I can pinpoint the bigger ones, I think that's where people's are going to get their best results. And I am concerned when people are, it's almost like with nutrition, you have to focus on the lowest level first and then work your way up. If you're at a level where you are, yes, I would definitely be looking at artificial sweeteners. And if someone does have a particular concern in their health, like if they have a GI issue, I would definitely be looking at artificial sweeteners. But again, it's about what's your priority as a person, and also where are you? Because there's certain nutrition information that's for certain people. And like I give this example, someone who has mast cell activation syndrome, a histamine intolerance, if they eat an orange, they could be in a 3-day full-blown flare where they could be having suicidal ideations, full-blown joint pain, rashes all over their body from an orange. So just saying citrus fruits are amazing for you, it doesn't apply to everyone. And we have such complex immune conditions going on. We have to look at them in the context of what people are really experiencing. So I would say something like artificial sweeteners, of course I'm concerned about them, but I have to focus on those heavy hitters for people, which is getting those foundations set in place for people.
Yeah, it's like if you are overweight, like most of the population is today, worrying about artificial sweeteners is like you're missing confusion. The forest for the trees.
Exactly.
And I do think that like a lot of the, many figures in the wellness community, they do, I think, cause distraction.
Yes.
They do tend to distract from like these bigger levers, higher impact levers.
Absolutely. I think if everyone focused on like foundations, like nervous system regulation, blood sugar regulation, getting enough protein, like those basic strength training, those basic foundations of what I would call being a human, we wouldn't really have to worry about the other stuff as much, but we probably still would ultimately have to worry about it to be in optimal health. But Max, we're working from a place of, optimal health? Are you kidding? Like, it's not even a place of acceptable health. People are sick. Like and you know this, you've known it in every book you've written and every episode you've ever done, but people are really sick. And it's so not a joke to me that the distraction, it ignites me, to be honest with you, because I do agree that distraction is extremely dangerous.
Yeah. We were talking before we got rolling about some of the more well-known paragons in the functional medicine space that have actually paved the way, I think, for a lot of these conversations. Like Dr. Mark Hyman, he's been on the podcast a number of times. David Perlmutter, functional medicine-focused neurologist. And yeah, I get that there is no one-size-fits-all, and that a lot of these doctors were able to rise to prominence by presenting ideas that were novel and maybe not the status quo and accepted by the medical establishment at large. But I think ultimately that it's a net positive to have more entry points for people. Absolutely. And to present novel ideas, because that's ultimately the only way that you push the science forward.
100%. I think the distraction or confusion part comes when people are saying artificial sweeteners are the cause of obesity.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, that's not the only thing. We have to look at the bigger thing. But honestly, like I said, I call paleo, like the paleo diet, the gateway into functional medicine. It certainly was for me. It was the first time after my dietitian degree where I was focused a lot more on disease management, I would say. I was like, oh, foods can reverse things? It didn't even occur to me, to be honest with you, in my degree, where food would be, I know it's corny to say, but food being medicine in any way, it did not occur to me until Chris Kresser's book, The Paleo Cure. And I was like, it changed my whole mind.
Yeah, I mean, 10 years ago, I think the paleo diet was, if you would have asked me, like if you were to have caught me in an elevator, and I had 10 seconds to respond, what is the best way to eat? I think the paleo diet has a ton of merit, and I think it's not because it eschews beans and things like that. Like, I eat legumes all the time. I think
sure.
I think it's fairly irrefutable that legumes are good for you. But I think rather than what the paleo diet suggests we remove from our diets, which you can debate, I think it's more about the emphasis on whole foods that the paleo diet has always sort of that's been the alarm that the paleo diet has always, at least in my view, sounded.
Yeah, I think the paleo diet would be my baseline diet that I would say to people too. It's really simple, and if you get into the nitty gritty of it, it of course can become more nuanced and a little more complicated. But at its base, it's really just eat foods that can be like hunted or gathered. It's not really more than that, and that's a good system to start with, I would say, for sure.
It takes like an evolutionary lens to diet and nutrition, which I think is great. I mean, we live in a time where there's a lot of, as we mentioned, like the predominance of ultra-processed foods, like food-like products that have ingredients lists with innumerable ingredients. Half of them you couldn't even pronounce if you tried. And then some will say, on the other hand, that avoiding foods simply because you can't pronounce the ingredients that they're made with, that's a ridiculous concept. But I'm like, that's a pretty good surrogate for an ultra-processed food if it has an ingredient in it that you couldn't recognize, because what that would suggest is you likely don't have it in your kitchen. And therefore, it's a food that could conceivably only be produced in the context of industrial food production.
Yeah, this is a big thing on social media, the toxin talk, as I would call it, which is that the super holistic, maybe not dietitian, nutrition professionals are saying everything's toxic, you have to remove everything from your house, versus the more all foods fit dietitians or practitioners, not only dietitians, of course, saying, water's a chemical. And I had a very funny comment from my friend on my page. Her name's Shyla, and she said, what are we, 13? Water's a chemical? Like, is that a real response? Like, people are actually sick. Like, that's why I take this so seriously.
Well, it's gaslighting.
It's gaslighting.
It's gaslighting. That's
what it is.
The
American
it's like,
public. Oh, what do you like water's a chemical. Like, that's not what we're saying, right? We're saying not toxin, as I think of it, as something that has toxic effects or the potential to have toxic effects. We're talking about an indirect relationship. We're not talking about food poisoning when you eat something. And yes, the dose does make the poison in this context too. But if the dose is every single day of your entire life, it's going to become poisonous. And that's what's important.
That's what's totally, it's this whole idea that that food quality doesn't matter, that like all foods have moral equivalency or not. I guess foods do have moral equivalency, but that they can all fit under the purview of calories. To me, it just doesn't make any sense, because people know about calories as well. Like, we're taught about calories in elementary school. And every fast food chain that I'm aware of now has calorie counts on their menus, and nonetheless, you see
it doesn't do anything. It hasn't helped at all. They have studies that show that having the calories on the menu makes a marginal effect.
Interesting.
And we're still missing the point. The point is, it doesn't matter how many calories of something that isn't food like you're consuming, because the chemical reactions in your body are extremely important when you're consuming it. And we're dismissing that. This is from my heart of hearts what I feel like has happened with the All Foods Fit nutrition professionals, because it's not only dietitians, it's a lot of intuitive eating people who are not dietitians too, of course, is that they truly, Max, do not believe that people can heal. They don't believe in the power of healing at all. So they're kind of saying, why would you torture yourself? You don't have a chance. And that's the feeling I get when I see that information. And they're saying, just feel comfortable. It's a coddling approach, like you said, because you're going to end up being sick anyway.
Why do you think they believe that to be the case though? Like, if you had to see the nutrition landscape through their eyes, why do you think, is it just that they're maybe not, I don't know, they've been indoctrinated, or what is it?
It's definitely a view of allopathic medicine, that the body is broken and continues to break. I think that's part of it. I mean, the dietitian degree, which is extensive in science for sure, and a long degree, it's a 6-year degree, it is within the realm of allopathic medicine. So I think we do get a lot of those messages from it. And it is really about, let's say someone had IBS, how do we do things to not make the stomach upset, right? How do we have softer foods? How do we have more gentle foods? Maybe increase or decrease fiber. But it's not with the mindset of we can heal these conditions, because allopathic medicine doesn't believe that you can heal chronic conditions. So I think that's where it's filtered from. And then we see, the vast amount of people suffering. I think it's up to 60% now with some sort of chronic illness in this country. It has really become the norm, to where we've become truly desensitized to illness, truly desensitized to what real food is and having a beautiful relationship with food is. We've never seen it as an example, and people think it doesn't exist.
Wow. Talk to me about because I know you were able to lose a ton of weight and keep it off. So you have your own weight loss journey.
Yeah.
So if you want to talk about that,
I would love to hear. Yeah. So I grew up in Queens, New York, as we were talking about before this. New Yorkers.
You're so New York.
Yeah. So yeah, and in growing up in Queens, New York, I always occupied a larger body when I was younger. The reason we use that phrasing, by the way, occupied a larger body, is just because I don't believe in obesity as a diagnosis, because it vacillates and goes through time. So it's not a permanent state of being. It's a symptom, really, and how I view obesity in general. So was in a larger body, still Michelle, but in a larger body, really did not affect my social life or my academic life or any part of my life in any substantial way. But then I was going to school at the University of Delaware, which was a much more homogenous environment. I grew up in Queens, super diverse place. You could be any size, any race, any gender, everyone's in. And I was like, oh, I'm going to Delaware. People are going to kind of judge me on my weight. So I went on this very radical, ill-advised weight loss journey where I lost close to 100 pounds in 3 months.
Whoa, 3 months?
Yeah, maybe 3 to 4 months. Really don't recommend that. As a result, I was chronically ill instantly. Not while I was in a larger body, actually when I lost weight. And when I lost weight, I started having anxiety, thyroid issues, gut issues, acid reflux, all these conditions started popping up, chronic panic attacks. And I realized after a long journey into naturopathic and functional nutrition and medicine that my body was in such a state of fear and starvation. It was like, what, are you killing us? Are we dying? What is this? That all of my hormones got so altered. So really my goal in working with clients is, how do we not do it wrong the first time so we don't have to do clean up, cellular and toxin cleanup for the next 10 years, basically.
Wow. So if you had if you had to lose 100 pounds again, what would you do differently?
First of all, I would make sure my drainage pathways are open during that time, and making sure I am doing everything to support my liver nutrient-wise, because people in larger bodies are often very nutrient deprived. And also your fat cells, as you're losing weight, will release and spill and pour a lot of toxins out. I would go, for some people, going low and slow is the right approach. And for other people, it does actually have to be drastic, because the body adapts. The body, when you're in a larger body, it's like, I'd like to stay in this. This feels safe and good. And our body always wants to do what feels balanced and safe. So sometimes people need a shove, and sometimes people need to go slow so that their nervous system can adjust. But I would be focusing on drainage pathways. I would be doing castor oil packs in my liver. I would be doing sauna. I would be doing anything to support detox and drainage, making sure my liver has enough nutrients the entire way through. And I would also be mentally checking in with myself the entire time. at this point, Max, if I really had to lose 100 pounds, I would also be open and have zero judgment if anyone wants to use supplements or medications to help them. No judgment whatsoever, because sometimes, again, you kind of need we call it like a sledgehammer. Sometimes you need a sledgehammer to push you into the next thing, and it's fine if people need that.
And what were the kinds of foods, like what was your, it was like essentially a crash diet.
Yeah, I was I was like fake vegan. I was vegan for 10 years, by the way.
You were?
Yeah, I know. And Gabrielle Lyon being my best friend, it's like, it's not even allowed. She was actually vegan too at one point.
Shoot, I didn't know that.
Yeah, she was a macro vegan in Hawaii.
What?
When she was living with her godmother in Hawaii. I know, exactly. And she is a person whose body responds very well to protein and was like, I really need it. Yeah, which is like...
She's jacked.
Yeah, she's the most ripped person and like coolest person ever, of course. It's not even a question. Yeah. Smartest, everything.
All the things.
So I was vegan also, which really set me up for a world of pain, because if you think about what liver detox is, it's a 2-stage, 3-stage process that includes immense amount of nutrients needed. I think when people think of detoxification, they think of, I do a juice cleanse and then things leave my body. Detoxification is an energy intensive and nutrient intensive process that mostly takes place in the liver. Of course, our kidneys are involved, and of course our digestion's involved. But if you're losing weight on that vegan diet and you don't have anything to get rid of those toxins, you don't have the liver support, it really puts you at risk for other conditions. So that's why I'm saying anything that helps with drainage and detoxification is so, so important. And not me being on a vegan diet, I had no protein. You need protein to make glutathione, as you very well know. You need protein for a lot of those liver functions, glutathione for a lot of those liver functions, and the production of amino acids for, the rest of your body and your neurotransmitters, everything like that.
What about like maintaining your muscle mass?
Exactly, which during weight loss is probably the most important factor, and if you're going to be able to keep it off, is maintaining muscle mass.
Why did you adopt veganism?
I did it kind of as a gag at first, and then honestly, I had an eating disorder. So my weight loss obviously had to be an extreme calorie restriction that was very ill-advised, again, because it cost me, everyone listening, 10 years to fix all of the metabolic damage from that. So I really wouldn't recommend going on a crash diet. But I was eating I'm issuing a trigger warning for this, but I was eating like 300 calories a day, like really low. And I used veganism as a cover for my eating disorder. So I was like, I'm vegan. I can't eat at this restaurant with you guys because I'm vegan. And then just kind of said in my head, because being vegan was very accepted in the dietitian community too. It was very promoted at the time, with some supplements like B12, iron, D. But I was very proud to be vegan, and I think I wore that band of like, oh, look what I can do. And that's really why I kept doing it until I started feeling so awful that I had no choice.
Wow. So veganism, I mean, really, as you've just shown, is a sort of socially acceptable eating disorder.
I think so. And I think that if people are doing it for animal rights reasons or religious reasons, there's no moral reason that I would ever have any judgment on anyone for it. From a physical reason, I don't know anyone whose body would survive on a vegan diet or thrive in the same way that someone else was. Of course, you can survive on it. I'm here, right? But thriving is a whole different ball game. And even the American Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, the AND, which used to be the ADA, says that a vegan diet needs to be well planned and supplemented. So if there's a diet that exists that you need to have supplements in order to have brain function, because you need vitamin B12 for brain function, it's not a great diet on its own.
Yeah, but it is a very effective way to obfuscate disordered eating,
Oh, definitely. And by the way, within the dietitian community, and again, I love my dietitians. I want us to kind of get it together on social media, but I think dietitians, almost all of them go into it for the right reasons, but there's a much higher proportion of those with eating disorders within the dietitian community compared to other professions.
Yeah, I've read that.
I think people want to find out I know I wanted to find out the secrets of weight loss. That's why I became a dietitian, because I had an eating disorder and wanted to. And I actually, within my dietetics degree, healed my eating disorder, that's a tricky word with eating disorders. I had a lot of healing of my symptoms and ultimately then healed my eating disorder over a very long time. But being a dietitian actually did help, because I realized how much I was under eating compared to even my colleagues. I was like, that's not good.
Wow. But I wonder if that's what colors, you see the messaging from dietitians in the social media space. It's like this repeated perseveration around like all foods can fit. There are no good or bad foods. And it makes you wonder if the reason why that seems to be such an important talking point for your average dietitian is because they themselves likely have suffered from disordered eating.
Yes, that is usually why. Or the conventional eating disorder clinic world is very centered around that. It's really centered around making sure you eat. In fact, you actually can't work at most eating disorder clinics if you have any food restrictions, even food allergies. It would be very hard to work there.
Wow.
Because I actually applied to work in an eating disorder clinic years ago, and because I have gluten intolerance but not celiac, I wasn't able to get the job. And they told me, like, you have to eat pizza with the girls because any sort of restriction in a person with an active eating disorder is deadly. And we have to really acknowledge that. Eating disorders are real. It's super, super real. You are absolutely right. We as dietitians operate through the lens of our own experience, and that's not a bad thing. That's an okay thing. But we have to understand the person sitting in front of us has potentially other priorities. And there are not many situations outside of eating disorders where disordered eating is the first nutritional priority, in my opinion. Because people are coming to us as dietitians for science, not psychology. Of course, we incorporate psychology into our work. And of course, it's a really important piece of mindset and everything as we eat and live. But we are not psychologists. We are not psychiatrists. We are nutrition professionals. And people are coming to us usually with some sort of chronic illness that accompanies that disordered eating as well.
Right. Not everybody that comes to see a dietitian has had a history of disordered eating.
Right. But that's the assumption.
That's the assumption.
Yeah, exactly.
So it makes you wonder whether or not that kind of repeated messaging is serving the public at large, right?
Yeah, I don't think it is. And to be honest with you, it makes me really upset if I think about someone like an experience you've had, Max, or an experience I've had. I have a family member with glioblastoma brain cancer. And to think about like the minutia, it's very interesting. Actually, her genetic mutation for her cancer responds to ketones, as in if she does a ketogenic diet, it actually makes her cancer grow, which is fascinating because often we think, oh, you got to go on a keto diet the second you hear that. So she has to have carbs every few hours. But thinking if I could save one day of my aunt's life or 1 minute of her discomfort, I will do anything in my power to do that. And that's why I love nutrition so much, because I believe in its capacity to heal. And I believe in even the act of eating foods that are nourishing is healing. And eating with people and doing things for yourself is so healing. So if my aunt who had cancer went to a dietitian who said we need to focus on your relationship with food, I would be really upset. And that's my concern too. What if someone does have pre-diabetes? Like, are these practitioners thinking about, are you going to be in the hospital with them injecting insulin? Like, who's going to be with them? And I'm the type of practitioner I am going to be with them. I'm going to go to the hospital with them if I have to. Like, who's going to sit with them in that real part of their life? Because that's what we're facing. We're not facing restriction and binging, which are extremely debilitating for people, and I work with all the time, but we're experiencing that with chronic illness.
Yeah. And wow, cancer is definitely it's an awful disease, and it's so complex. We've had my friend Dr. Joe Zundel on the podcast a number of times, and we just did a more recent episode with him, and it just underscores how patients can be actually harmed by the oversimplification of these sort of like woo-woo dietary. Not that the ketogenic diet is woo-woo in any sense.
And there are probably some cancers that are it's supportive for, I'm sure, but it's maybe not also, and that's the question.
Well, it's just there's never a one-size-fits-all prescription with a condition as complex as cancer.
Exactly. Well, it's just I had Jill Blakeway, she wrote this book Energy Medicine. She's incredible. Wow. And she's an acupuncturist, an amazing acupuncturist and researcher in New York. And she did studies on cancer cells and found that they were just like legitimately narcissistic cells, like they act like narcissistic. And so it's really about how do those cells interact with their environment more than it just is like, oh, you give a ketogenic diet and it does this thing. Like, there's very few things we can do that will work on a general population, that will work with even a person with brain cancer versus ovarian cancer or something like that. It's so different, and the hormones involved are different. Every part of the body is different. So I think like precision medicine and precision nutrition are the future.
Yeah. Do you think there are any diets that do have merit behind them? Like, there's so many, now that have, I guess, brands associated with them. The carnivore diet, veganism, paleo, AIP. I guess for people suffering from autoimmune conditions. But are there any that strike you as having, I guess, more merit behind them and possibly even worth experimenting with?
I think if you are doing something offhand, I do think a paleo diet is a good starting place, or a Mediterranean diet. I think both of them have really strong research behind them. And you also have to look at research, but you have to look at mechanism, right? So I think people get really tripped up on the evidence-based trap, which is like, this one study didn't show that this did this. And it's much more about, okay, what happens when you put this into the human body, and how does this impact the rest of the human body? So I'm always looking at mechanism. Again, when I look at veganism, I'm concerned about the liver. Other people aren't thinking about that with veganism. They're thinking when you eat meat, it taxes your liver, but it actually gives you the nutrients that your liver needs to function. So on its baseline, I would be looking for a nutrient-dense, processed food, low diet. And I think a paleo or Mediterranean diet would be a good place to look.
Yeah. What's your stance on meat?
I'm very pro meat, I guess you could say. Yeah, I'm a very strong believer that most people require some amount of meat in order to get to their daily nutrient needs, with especially against the toxin load that we have in our environment. We really need our livers to function very, very well. In Ayurveda, we focus a lot on the liver. In TCM, they focus quite a bit on the kidneys, and they're like a theoretical kidney also. It's not necessarily your kidneys. It's like it's a lot of the meridians as they channel through your kidneys. But yeah, but either way, I focus on those detox organs and of course our gut and digestion, and that's where I'm making those assessments from.
So animal source foods can actually help assist your body with its detox, I guess, pathways.
There's probably no more important food to help your body with liver detox than meat.
Fascinating. That's interesting, because I think a lot of people think about going on like these detox cleanses and actually like going vegan for a period.
Yeah, I think so. There is something a little magical that happens when people go on a vegan diet. They do often, if they've never been on one before, especially, lose a lot of weight. And there's a reason for that, because any either high carb diet or low carb diet will produce some sort of potential weight loss results in the short term. The reason it's really about activating the Randall cycle or not, and really focusing on, again, is your body focused on one nutrient at a time. Sometimes our body really likes that and responds to that. And I think that's why people get this kind of high when they're on a vegan diet in the beginning. People feel really good on a vegan diet in the beginning, and then it catches up with them. But it takes like 10 years to get rid of your B12 stores, or to notice that they're low in the first place. So I think people don't realize that it's hurting them on the back end when they are feeling good on the front end.
Yeah. Also, I mean, I feel like people that suddenly adopt these like higher fiber diets overnight, like they might have a little bit of digestive discomfort, but they're probably ingesting a lot more fiber, or which is helping, I guess, I don't know, clean out the GI tract. And
there's eating the plants we love. I think it's fantastic to eat the plants. And I think that I do then have an issue kind of with a carnivore diet. Having all of the nutrients from meat is fantastic for your liver, but you also need the fiber to help you with detoxification and drainage from the vegetables too at the same time.
It's also a big confounder, and I think these nutrition studies where, it's really hard to institute a controlled diet, because if people that there's an inherent bias where people that sign up for nutrition studies, they tend to put focus, regardless of what intervention they're on, more focus than they were before on their diets.
100%.
So inevitably there is an improvement in diet quality, I think, when people sign up for these trials, confounding the results. When you see, like, for example, control diet versus vegan diet, or which was done recently in the in that Netflix series, right?
Don't even talk about it.
The twin study. Yeah. It's like whenever people put a focus on their diet without even like dietary instruction to do anything differently than they're already doing, there tends to be an improvement.
Yeah, and I think there's a physical component to that, and I think there's an energetic component to that too. There's a key word I use kind of that underlines all of this, which is that there has to be hope. And I think the hopelessness of, well, you're going to be sick, so you might as well feel nice about it mentally. I think that's what irritates me so much and makes me so upset, is I'm like, you can't take away hope from people. It's probably the most important thing when battling chronic or acute illness, is just having hope. You have to have hope in these things.
You do have to have hope. What about carbs? I think a lot of people are still afraid of carbs. Why do people have this apprehension to eating carbohydrate-rich foods? And is carbohydrate fear based in any sort of reality?
I have a tremendous concern about women under consuming carbs, especially. And when women come through my practice, I often see they are under consuming carbohydrates. I think men are generally, because of muscle mass differences, and this is not the case for every single person, but it can be the case that they might be more efficient at utilizing muscle to obviously break down and get carbohydrates when they need it. Women have what I would call like more cortisol prone bodies, a little bit more cortisol-y. We're protectors. We are the people who are like first up in the morning, making sure everything is going, which means that we're more sensitive to signals of threat. And when you're sensitive to signals of threat, one of the worst signals of threat is having low blood sugar. And that will then cascade response into low blood sugar will turn into high cortisol, which can then become, pathological and continued. So I do worry about women not getting enough blood sugar management from a very low carb diet, and also the other antioxidant nutrients that we find in carbohydrate foods as well.
Yeah. No, I'm a fan of carbs. And so far as they can support your workouts. They're great. They're important for thyroid function.
If you have constant and chronic low blood sugar, you will then have constant and chronic high cortisol, which will block the conversion of thyroid hormone. So right there, it's an issue. And cortisol can kind of get its hands in a lot of other biological processes too. Not to mention, anxiety being a huge concern for people, constant and low blood sugar, even intermittent fasting in women. I find a lot of low blood sugar, and I find a lot of immediate anxiety. Like I have a lot of female clients who can be on a like low carb diet for a week, and they'll start waking up at 3 a.m. every single night. And I'm like, with anxiety. And it's because that's the kind of cortisol is not only your stress hormone, it's your rising hormone. It's the one that wakes you up in the morning. So if it fears that it's not able to get you enough sugar, if it fears you're starving, it will wake you up sooner. So it starts waking you up at 3 a.m. So if people see that they're waking up between 3 and 5 a.m., you might be eating too low carb.
But I think some people still believe that carbs make you fat, that carbs are inherently fattening.
Yeah, they're just another nutrient. I think that carbohydrates have one thing about them that can be concerning, which is that you can probably eat a lot of them without being as conscious calorie wise. Like protein, you can't really have 100 grams of protein in one sitting. You'll be quite ill. It won't feel good, obviously. Yeah. But carbs, you can definitely crush 100 grams of carbs in one sitting. Really, really, a bowl of cereal. I mean, you can eat that very easily. So a bagel has, like 80 grams of carbohydrates. So I think that's the only thing about carbohydrates. But if you're eating whole food carbs that aren't highly processed grain foods, and I like some grains, I love oatmeal, all these different grains, you're not going to overconsume carbs. You're not going to eat 5 potatoes. They're not that good. No one's going to have 5 potatoes.
Well, also potatoes are highly satiating. So is oatmeal.
They carried nations for centuries, potatoes. They did.
Yeah. No, I think that's really important that people don't fear carbohydrates.
I completely agree with you. And also just this word you just used, fear. I think fearing food does lead to legitimate disordered eating and eating disorders, which both of them are very legitimate. And those can alter and create negative health consequences. Having a disordered relationship with food can certainly do that, and certainly an eating disorder can.
What about fats and oils? Where do fats and oils place within your recommendations?
I think we had a huge fear of fats and oils. Obviously, in the 90s, it was the whole thing was hating fat and oil. And I think we did swing a little too far in the paleo. I do think some people do not respond as well to high fat diets. And we have to also understand that person's constitution, their digestion. But I feel really strong about, certain oils, and I feel concerned about other types of oils.
That's very controversial.
It is. You're not allowed to not like omega-6 fats or seed oils. It's just it's a not allowed situation right now.
Well, in your training, you were probably taught that omega-6
PUFAs
dominant, polyunsaturated fat dominant grain and seed oils were, if anything, healthful.
Yes. There was a lot of like heart healthy studies at the time. I will say this though, and this is very interesting about our dietetics degree, and I bring this up to dietitians because, Max, I don't know if you remember, we got into like a little dietitian battle about PUFAs. Someone reposted something you posted about PUFAs, and then I kind of went to bat for you. But in the comment section, I was saying basically when we were in school to be a dietitian and we were learning enteral nutrition, like tube feeding, it was so important to get the ratio of omega-6 to omega-3s right, because we understood that if it's too high in omega-6, it can cause immediate jeopardy. It is so dangerous. So I'm like, we understand the inflammatory cascade and capacity and that it can compete with omega-3s. We know this from a different part of our education. I don't care about one study that says that omega-6 fats in any quantity are okay. I care about understanding the mechanism of the human body. You know that, right? Like, that this ratio we've understood has to be in the right proportions, omega-6 to omega-3, so much so that it could really fatally injure someone in a hospital setting if you're giving them enteral nutrition when the omega-6 ratio is so high. So I'm like, we did learn that. We have to remember that we learned that.
Yeah. I guess, updated my stance on I'm constantly updating my stance on myriad topics, but even with these, refined, bleached, and deodorized seed oils, like, I avoid them as best as I can in my own home, but I'm well aware that I consume them when I'm eating out
every single time you're at a restaurant.
Every single time you're at a restaurant, yeah. Mm-hmm. And I do think that there is a bit of undue fear-mongering today that
Correct.
Especially within the wellness community, but even now in a broader sense, like, it's become, I think, a part of the national dialogue with regard to nutrition, that seed oils are like the smoking gun for all of our health ills.
Not it. Missed it again.
Yeah.
Not it.
Missed it again. Yeah.
Missed it again.
Yeah.
Not
We always tend to like overcorrect as a society. And I
think that was a push. It's a little too far. And I would agree. I even think the carnivore diet's a push from the paleo diet. It's like everything's just a little too much and a little too far. It is more simple than people think. But I will say this, when you're in a state of disease, your body is going to act differently than if you're in a state of health. And we have to acknowledge most people are in a state of disease, or at least the majority of people are in a state of disease. So for someone who is in a state of disease, maybe it might be that consuming omega-6 fats is really important to them. But Max, if you're a healthy person like you might be able to get away with it at restaurants, and it really isn't that big of a deal. The goal is to get away with as much as you can. The goal is not to restrict as much as you can. But that's kind of the message, is how much can we restrict? So the goal is to get away with it, but I don't know how much people are getting away with it because they're still sick. So I'm not really sure if people are getting away with it or not.
Yeah, like, I don't think that these fats are inherently inflammatory, and I might have suggested as such in the past, but I think that the problem is with the processing. It's in the restaurant setting where these oils are heated and then reheated. When they're used in the fryer setting, I think that's when they become particularly
And that's
dangerous.
when we eat them. You and I, every time we eat out.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I actually don't think that that's controversial.
It is controversial still, I think.
Still? Interesting.
Yeah, I think maybe. It's the oxidized fats. I think that is universally accepted as a problem, and fried fats. I think we got that far. In trans fats, I think we're there. I think for myself, it's not, again, there's no one food in isolation that causes illness. It's how does this food interact with the body that exists? And if it is a body that is already in, let's call it the fire's burning inside the body, you don't want to pour oil on that fire. If you poured oil on cement, nothing happens. It's not a problem. The goal is to make it so your fire's not burning in your body, so you can go have some seed oils when you're at a restaurant and not worry about it.
Exactly. Yeah, that is the way that I think about it, actually. That, and I'm sure somebody will correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that they, by providing the precursors to your body's inflammation pathways, it's not that these fats are inherently inflammatory, but having them lingering around in your body in excess for when that inflammatory challenge does arrive, I think that's the more interesting research question that I would love to see investigated.
Yeah, I think, like, if you look at how omega-3 and omega-6 fats are broken down and incorporated into the body, you can argue that omega-6 fats are anti-inflammatory or pro-inflammatory. I think what we have nailed down is the ratio between omega-6 and omega-3. You have to strike a beautiful ratio, and it's 20-1 when it should be maybe 4-1. And if you are at home consuming those oils, you better believe you're going to get them when you're out already. So I would assume when home, try to limit the omega-6 content. And then while out, maybe you won't have to be as conscious. But assume that every single thing you eat while out is going to have a higher omega-6 content.
What about the calorie load of oils and fats in general? Like, do you think that's something that we need to be concerned about?
No. I mean, no in the way of... if you're frying something, yeah, it's going to be, you could have 5 tablespoons of oil in one piece of chicken. Yes, that does create a concern for me. But just adding it to salads or something like that, it's not the heavy hitter. I don't think that's the heavy hitter.
Yeah. I mean, 5 tablespoons of oil, that's like 600 calories of pure fat.
Well, if you think about fried chicken, it's like a piece of it's like 800 calories. Like the chicken's 200 and the fried part, you're absorbing all the oil in frying.
Are you an advocate of high protein diets the way that we see?
I sure am.
You are?
I would say my what I see a lot in my practice is that people can't tolerate them, though, because maybe they have too low of stomach acid, maybe their liver isn't ready to help and their kidneys aren't ready to help break that down. So I kind of condition people to go into high protein diets by reintroducing stomach acid, by, again, eating in a really peaceful environment. I have a lot of clients who have acid reflux. It's a very common condition that I work with, and making sure that we can tolerate that. And it does take a lot of myth busting to get people to eat a higher protein diet too, to be honest with you. People do not feel comfortable or safe eating a high protein diet.
What would you say are the biggest myths?
I think that it will cause heart disease. I think that it causes cancer. I think that those are top two that meat like sits in your body for years, like those kind of things I'm still hearing from people.
This idea that meat rots in your colon. I mean, that is the biggest
we're omnivores.
Myth.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Meat typically doesn't even end up in the colon.
Yeah, exactly.
It's
a very stomach acid centric digestion piece. And then the small intestine too. Yeah, it's not really in your large intestine. Exactly.
Yeah. It's one of these low residue foods. I mean, it's so nutrient dense. It's the fibers. It's like the indigestible plant material that ends up in the colon, right? Because
that's a very colon thing. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. But that's where the microbiome is. That's where we have this, this organ, if you will, of microbes that coexist with us symbiotically to help us break down and extract energy from that fiber. But even the fiber that we ingest, we only have I think it's at most a 10%. We're only able to extract about 10%, up to 10% of energy from dietary fiber.
Exactly. Yeah, it's more utilized in digestion and non-calorie contributory. Yeah, of course.
Yeah. What about intermittent fasting? Some of these other, I guess, more trending, topical dietary strategies that the evidence-based community seems to love to hate on.
Yeah, I think that the people who love intermittent fasting a lot are not to be hurtful, kind of a dude like you, right? Like you have muscle mass, you're overall pretty healthy, and I think someone like you might respond a lot better to intermittent fasting than a menstruating woman in their 20s. I think it's a very different thing. Personally, I will speak for the functional dietetics community because we're really strong on this. I've never seen intermittent fasting work for a woman in the long term where it did not tank their hormone production and skyrocket their cortisol. I have never seen it happen once. We run Dutch tests on clients. I'll look in their blood labs. It is so obvious when clients have been doing intermittent fasting in the long term or on those aggressive low carb diets. So I would say for menstruating women, I almost never recommend intermittent fasting. It would be for really specific gut conditions if they need gut rest and to get that migrating motor complex back online and operating and give it enough time to do so. Other than that, for menstruating women, I really wouldn't recommend it. For almost all women, I wouldn't recommend it. And it's different for men. If a man is struggling from anxiety, if a man is struggling from blood sugar regulation issues that are worsened by intermittent fasting, I'm also cautious. Otherwise, every tool is a tool that you can try.
Yeah. I don't intermittent fast, but I do try to eat in alignment with my circadian rhythms,
sure.
Like what we're learning about circadian biology.
So important, especially when it comes to leptin too. We're learning so much about leptin. And I think leptin might be the key to weight loss. I think that's one of the more important features of weight loss, and intermittent fasting does seem to, in some people, have a positive effect on leptin sensitivity.
What is leptin?
So leptin is a hormone produced by our fat cells, and it will regulate our fullness, essentially, and it will regulate leptin and ghrelin kind of work together to regulate how hungry we are and how quickly our metabolism is going to function, because they are making sure that our fat storage is at a correct level. What ends up happening is that as people's weight goes up, their body's leptin becomes less sensitive, so it's not acknowledging that weight is not supposed to be that weight. So you know how set point theory, have you heard of that before? Where
no, what is that?
Basically our body becomes accustomed to understanding that this is the weight we're supposed to be. So then people end up getting into these weird weights where they're like, every day I wake up and I'm 242 pounds and I can't break that point. And often this is a problem where your leptin is saying, hold on to this fat. I think this is where we're supposed to be, because our bodies really don't want to starve or die. So really one of the more impressive and interesting studies I've ever seen was they did a study in 2016 with the Biggest Loser contestants, and 14 out of 16 of them regained a majority of the weight. I think when people hear that, their inclination is to say, oh, they went home from the ranch and they started eating like crazy and not working out. That didn't happen at all. They went home and they were still consuming less than 1,500 calories a day, most of them, and working out hours a day. Their baseline metabolism had adjusted so much because it was compensating for that rapid weight loss and deathly afraid of dying, right? So our metabolisms do adjust, and those adjustments were permanent. In my opinion, that's also because probably leptin levels were not adjusted for. Very fascinatingly, in weight loss surgery, leptin and ghrelin levels are altered permanently, or in most cases, for a very long period of time, which is why people not only feel not hungry from it, which is more as a result of gastrin and ghrelin, but also their body adjusts to the new weight and doesn't try to push them up to the higher weight.
Interesting. Okay, so circling back to circadian rhythms, how does, I guess, eating late at night, does that dysregulate?
Yes, that would dysregulate leptin too. Our body only understands how to function in any form from daily light exposure. Like that's how our body learns. This is how we do this at this time. This is how we run our metabolism. And leptin is very responsive to light changes. So really like one of the first interventions we would put in place to help someone with leptin is looking at not directly into the sun, but looking near the sun in the morning and having a consistent circadian rhythm. It's just it's a safety signal to the body. And then also we've learned that like leptin will respond to that light in a way and become more sensitized.
Interesting. So what are the consequences of that?
Of light leptin exposure in the morning? Yeah. Or we want leptin to be sensitive, not insensitive, essentially. You want it to be sensitized. The consequences are hopefully metabolic restoration. I think that would be a happy consequence.
Less hunger.
Yeah. And also your body, your metabolism adjusting potentially to not
faster
hold
metabolism.
on. Yeah. Hopefully. Yes, but hard to quantify that too. But yeah, the leptin will do two things. It's a fullness factor, and also it will instruct, should we hold on to fat or release fat? That's kind of, it's a regulator. It's like a thermometer of those two things. So it will tell you if it feels like you lost too much weight, it'll kick up your hunger and slow down your metabolism. If it feels that you need to lose weight, in a perfect condition, it would actually lower your hunger and increase your metabolism to help you do that. It's intended for homeostasis, but highly processed foods, and I don't know if you know Stephan Guyenet, he wrote the book Hungry Brain, and he talks, like, I think he really is very passionate about leptin being one of the cornerstones and most important pieces of weight loss too. And it's really about, like we talked and started this conversation, not having those highly satiating, like really hyperpalatable foods, because that drives leptin crazy.
Highly unsatiating.
Yeah, exactly.
Highly calorie dense. Yeah, minimally
like
satiating.
Emotionally satiating, not physically satiating.
Emotionally satiating.
Yeah.
I mean, you got to make room for the fun foods. What proportion would you say? I mean, like, because I'm sure you live in the modern world. Obviously, there are tasty foods. Like, it's okay to have
gosh, of course,
fun foods every now and then, right?
Yeah.
What proportion of them? What proportion of one's diet do you think should we reserve for those kinds of foods?
I would say just eat them when it feels precious and important, and don't eat them when it doesn't. So like, don't eat the random Dunkin' Donuts donut, like get the magical, important donut on the special occasion. Less than a percentage, I would focus on an emotion, and have it when it's like really, really special and important to you. And it's like, this is my thing and I want to have this thing and it's for me.
Yeah.
I think that's more important. And think about, again, that voice that you're having around that food. Like, this is so exciting and I can't wait to have this. Or like, I'm just throwing it in my mouth. Like, see how you talk about it and get really excited and enjoy it. And it can be like a cultural treat. It can be a social treat. Of course, like, we can have delicious and fun foods, but make it important.
Yeah. I think Alan Aragon referred to them as like a planned indulgence.
Love that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it feels fun. Indulgence feels like, kind of bad, which is fun.
But if it's like Friday and they've put out donuts in the rec room, right? Just because they're there doesn't mean that that's like an invitation to indulge, right? Like, practice a bit of like mindfulness, I suppose.
Yeah, absolutely. I think mindfulness is the word. And also really knowing, are you eating to support your nervous system in that moment? Are you eating to squash your nervous system in that moment? What is that doing for you? And think about things in a mindful way. I think mindfulness is a great word to use.
Yeah, we had Judson Brewer on the podcast, who's an MD, PhD psychologist, or psychiatrist rather, and he wrote his most recent book is on obesity and why hunger seems to be this like never-ending pervasive thing that seems to be so unyielding today, in the context of the modern food environment. And one of the I think more impactful antidotes that he offers is like, just bring some awareness to your choices.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think so. In the model of kind of binge eating as we look at it now, I'd say there's 3 modes of treatment for binge eating in the binge eating treatment community. One would be the classic eating disorder treatment, which is liberalizing food restrictions, so that it's like the more you restrict, the more you binge. There are real studies that show that the more you restrict, the more you binge. So that would be the all foods fit kind of approach, liberalize food restrictions, and also kind of access your hunger cues. On the complete opposite side, funny enough, is that some people have substantially researched the idea that, and believe the idea that if you eat highly processed foods, they will actually cause you to binge. So you have to restrict those foods in order to not binge, because they are the driver of binging. My world in which I work is that third option, which is really focusing on the somatic and nervous system aspect of eating, which is that right before a binge, most people don't realize they are in a dysregulated state. That could be a physical state, like I feel not good, I need to do something to change this, mental or physical, and food is extremely effective at helping us with that. It really releases a tremendous amount of hormones, neurotransmitters. We feel great for a short period of time. It's real. People are binging for a reason. It's not to hurt themselves. It's not sabotage. It's for preservation and for happiness and safety and all of these things. So if we acknowledge how we feel before, during, and after a binge, from that somatic experience, from that nervous system experience, that can transform a binge. So I would say one model might work better for other people, but either way, you have to incorporate somatic and nervous system work.
Yeah, totally. One of my favorite posts of yours that got a lot of traction on your Instagram is you sort of have to act like a health nut in order to stay healthy in America today. What do you mean by that?
So I think that not that I think people are so precious and they can't handle it, but oftentimes when people are making health changes, people are making a lot of commentary about their health changes. At baseline in this country, if you do not intervene, you will be sick. That is at baseline, that is the trajectory of all of us if we do not intervene. So in order to be well, you have to be exceptional, and that's the truth. From our water supply, our food supply, our environment, toxic stress, toxin overload, everything, we are slated to be sick. And that might not be nice to say, but it is true to say. And I care so much about people that I'd rather be controversial and bold and let people know, like, you really have to be like really on top of stuff in order to be okay, because I watch people every day who are not okay and I care about them.
Yeah. Such a New Yorker. You don't hold any punches.
Yeah, no, we don't. Which
I appreciate. It's so important. Yeah. I mean, because today on social media, it's like everybody is seemingly walking on eggshells, right? There's like everything has to have a trigger warning. Everybody needs to feel coddled. Every messaging has to be appropriate to, for every person that stumbles upon a given post. And I think it leaves the general population feeling confused.
Yeah, I'd rather be known as a person who's compassionate than a coddler any day. And I will not sacrifice any word or important message that I have for people in fear that someone's not going to like me or be. I don't believe that it's actually triggering for people to see that omega-6 fats might be pro-inflammatory. If that's internally triggering, it means that it's bringing up something important that we need to address within self. But I'm not going to hold back, because I am the person that my clients will go to when they're getting that diabetes diagnosis, and I care too much about people and too much about our trajectory to withhold that information. Can it be done in a compassionate way? 100%. Of course we can give new information in a nuanced and compassionate way.
Yeah. What do you think today people like? I mean, there's a lot of confusion on social media, and every other week there seems to be a new point of contention where it's like the wellness community is batting heads against the so-called evidence-based community. It's like a different thing every week, whether it's like the aspartame controversy or seed oils or carbs. How do we right this ship? Because I feel like ultimately, I think it's ultimately positive that the more voices, the better, right? That we're
Always.
Having these conversations.
Yeah.
But I do think that it does cause confusion and distraction and potentially even harm. I wouldn't say that it's like the majority of cases, but I do think a lot of people end up, adopting these like fringe principles, fringe diets, and leading themselves to, toward down a path of real harm.
Absolutely. Yeah, the answer is just like be a person and just consider other people and think about, if I was writing this information for a family member, what is the point of me writing this and who's getting this information? I think I see people like for instance, the practitioner I said who had the Frappuccino before, and it's like, who's that for? It's for the one niche person who only has a disordered relationship with food and their health is perfectly fine and they don't care about their future health. They just have to work on their relationship with food. Like, think about, who am I doing this for? And then I think look online and see who are those practitioners or those people who are doing it for you, or are they doing it for themselves? And a lot of times people are writing things because it looks attractive and it looks on trend and it looks like that. I think it becomes obvious, and really think, is this information for me? And then I implore practitioners to think, who is this information really for? Why am I posting this? Who am I helping? That's always the question. Who am I helping with this information? Yeah. Are you inspiring hope? Are you giving education? Or are you just reposting videos of someone's and bashing them online?
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. Like, what did you do there? Well, how did you help today?
I see, and I see a lot of posts like basically defending, like, you know, people will come out and like make whole diatribes defending their credentials, and it's like, why are you doing, like, are you here to add value to the public, or Exactly. Are you here to basically defend the choices that you've made, you know, and the academic path that you've decided to take? Like, which is fine, but ultimately, like, who is that serving? Like,
yeah, I don't care that I'm a dietitian. I could have been an FNTP and been as eager and as supportive to help people. And that's very not a thing with dietitians, by the way. In school, it's very like, dietitians are the only nutrition experts. I think CNSs are incredible, FNTPs. There's so many degrees. I have an amazing practitioner on my team who's a functional diagnostic nutrition practitioner. I believe we all have a space. And why would you not want as many people as possible helping? We need all hands on deck. We're talking about hundreds of millions of people who need our help. We're going to spend time squashing other practitioners and reposting their videos. Like, I wouldn't be so immodest to think that my time is so invaluable and that people don't deserve that. Like, why would I, put yourself on the line and like put your stuff out there to help people instead of feeding your ego for a profession? Like, what are you doing?
100%. Yeah. There's a lot of bad actors in the space, unfortunately. And I think it's really important to be able to identify who the helpers are. And you're no doubt, I mean, one of the helpers for sure. Yeah. I think it's so important. 'Cause also, like, there's a lot of, everybody just wants eyeballs today.
I know, which is gross and weird.
Attention,
not a New York thing, by the way. I think
clout.
New Yorkers are cooler than that.
Yeah. Yeah. But it's like, there are so many easy ways and intellectually lazy ways to gain traction on social media today, right? Like, I feel like there's like this playbook. You can either make grossly outlandish claims, fearmonger certain food ingredients, tear down others, right? But it's like, it's so lazy, and none of those things are in the service of the public good.
And people can see it. I think people can really see it. I will know. I like practitioners. I like people, I have a lot of clients, Max, who I've been with for 6 years weekly. Like, I sit with people from one part of their health journey to the end, and I witness people. You can see people online who sit and witness people and watch a transformation and are sitting in the shit with people versus people who don't. And you'll know. You'll look at something and say, is this person like gonna be at the hospital with me? Like, is that the person? And I think it's very obvious who's not. And I appreciate researchers online, but context is everything. There is no greater science in nutrition than watching what happens to someone's body and talking to them every day about it. It's the best. That's better than any nutritional science you can do in a lab, and I'm convinced of that.
Totally true. Where do supplements place? Are you a fan of
I'm a huge fan of nutritional supplements. So I think there's a world of functional medicine, a world of functional nutrition that I would call like fake functional right now, which is like, get a GI map test and then I'll send you a bunch of supplements. That's not functional nutrition at all. Functional nutrition is the belief that our body has an innate capacity to heal, and we need to understand where in our body needs more balance and healing. So supplements are a piece of the puzzle, and I utilize a tremendous amount of nutritional supplements in my practice, again, because we're slated against really strong forces of illness potentially, and we're not going to get our soil's depleted of nutrients. We're going to have to get the nutrients from somewhere. And then there's also, nutritional supplements might use to seal the lining of the gut. There might be nutritional supplements that can facilitate liver detox. There's, nutritional supplements are not just vitamin D. There's so many things we can do with functional nutrition.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm a huge fan personally of magnesium. I mean, I've been taking that, for like religiously for the past probably decade. I find that it helps with migraines and sleep and mood and all those things. Magnesium plays hundreds of roles in the body. I take creatine protein powder.
Fantastic.
Do you supplement with protein?
I do. I have to take protein. I won't get it done otherwise. Like I need so much more protein than I'm willing to eat because I want to work all the time and like not eat. I have to get at least 1 or 2 protein shakes in a day. Yeah.
And people think that protein is like a highly processed food. It depends on the protein, but in general, whey protein is a minimal.
I often recommend whey protein. Yeah. It's pretty straight up whey protein, and it's one of the best absorbed protein powders, if not arguably the best absorbed.
Yeah, huge fan of whey protein.
I mean, you'd have to eat like how many? So an egg has about 6 or 7 grams of protein. If you really wanted to get like 35 grams, you got to hit 7 eggs. It's rough stuff. Like that's a little bit hard to do for a lot of us. And then also what I do like about protein powder is that you're not getting the other carbs and fat. I'd rather eat the carbs and fat and then just drink the protein and get it done versus, again, if you're eating 7 eggs, it's a tremendous amount of fat. And the fat is amazing. Like beautiful fats coming from eggs, but maybe not everyone can tolerate or needs that extra fat as compared to other foods they're going to eat in the day.
Totally. Yeah. The fat calories do add up.
Yeah, they do.
Yeah.
And it's just also like, I really don't want to sit and eat 7 hard-boiled eggs.
Yeah. No, thank you.
4, not 7. Yeah.
Yeah. No, hard-boiled eggs are a food that I have a weird relationship with. Like, I think that, like, for the vast majority of my life, I thought they were gross. Like, I was a huge fan of eggs. I would eat, any scramble, omelet, poached eggs, love them. Over easy. Hard-boiled eggs to me just kind of gross unless you make them yourself and like.
Yeah, it's also
you eat them in the privacy of your own home.
I brought them on airplanes. I'm that horrible person who brings them. No, I'll eat them quick. I'll pop them in quick. But I will also say that I think the process of making hard-boiled eggs is pretty torturous. I am now more into them because by the time I'm getting them out of the thing and they're like wet, I'm out. I put them in the air fryer. You can put 4 in the air fryer at 250 for 15 minutes. They just come out done. It's a ball game change for me. Yeah.
They go in raw into the air fryer?
Yeah, you just put them in the air fryer in the basket and then they come out, they're perfectly hard boiled.
And like for how many minutes?
So 215 for 15 minutes, maybe 16 depending on the air fryer. Wow. It's been life-changing though, I will say, because I'm not going to sit and boil them. And I don't care if the air fryer's got a little, it's a risk I'm willing to take. It's a little more toxic, the air fryer. I'm cool with it. I'll take it so I can eat my eggs.
Interesting. I don't have an air fryer. I recently got a rice cooker.
Oh, so this is a fascinating thing, rice cookers, because in dietitian school, a lot of our schooling is focused on what foodborne illness you can get from which food. And rice is a unique food because if it cools, you can't kill that specific type of bacteria in reheating. So that's why rice cookers are so important, because you really should keep it at a certain temperature. You can't let it cool completely and then reheat because it has the potential to grow this bacteria.
Wait, so is there any, I've seen headlines recently about this. Is there any concern with like cooking rice and then saving it, putting it in your fridge and then reheating it the next day?
If you're a dietitian, and we learn in school, there's tremendous concern it could kill you seemingly, but I don't actually think it can. But yeah, it could create a heat-resistant bacterial toxin.
There is a specific kind of bacteria that grows on cool rice?
Yes. Well, it grows, you have to find the name of it. Sorry about that.
Yeah, no, let's cool it. No.
I don't know why I'm forgetting it. There's so many bacterial strains we learned about in school. Dietitians everywhere are going to rip their hair out when they hear this. They're like, we learned about this for 4 years, Michelle.
Bacteria.
Yeah, it's a specific type of bacteria that is non-heat resistant once it is cooled. So you can't cool it and then reheat it. It will not die.
Uncooked rice can contain spores of bacillus.
Yes, it's a bacillus. Yes.
Cereus that can cause food poisoning. The spores can survive when rice is cooked. If rice is left standing at room temperature, the spores can grow into bacteria. These bacteria will multiply and may produce toxins that cause vomiting.
There's no heating that'll get them after that.
Whoa.
They're heat resistant.
So ideally it says serve rice as soon as it's been cooked.
Or you leave it in a rice cooker and it never cools.
Because the rice cooker keeps it warm.
Yep, exactly. Which I'm sure that other cultures have known about forever, and that's why rice cookers exist.
That's very interesting. So when playing by the book, as far as like your dietetics education goes, you don't want to save rice?
Yeah, I will walk around, if my family gets Chinese food, I will walk around and throw the rice out when they're sleeping. I feel like so many
people like meal prep and like make rice and they put it, I've seen like on...
I think for most people, again, it's how much you can get away with.
Yeah.
But I don't want to have that one batch that it could potentially be a problem. Yeah, it's also just as a funny thing about dietitians is that we learn about food poisoning so much in school that by the time you leave, you're like, everything's going to get me by the time you leave.
Wow.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Interesting. Yeah, that's why the official recommendations for like meat cooking, right? Like char the hell out of it.
Oh yeah, exactly. Like no bacteria, which might be like also a little bit of a very cautious approach, especially in America. It might be different in different countries too. But certainly, yeah, we have the, food safety zone. Like it's really
fascinating. Wow. I've learned a lot. So cool. Well, anything else you want to cover? I mean, the floor is yours. This was so fun. We've covered so many different topics.
I know we jumped around in a really beautiful way. My hope and wish for the future is that, and I believe that we can, I believe dietitians, health coaches, any kind of nutritionist, functional medicine doctors, naturopaths, I think that we are the key that can unlock the future. And I believe in us so much, but we have to focus more on what other people need and what we're seeing in front of us. And we have to keep learning, because I don't think what we've learned is enough as any kind of allopathic practitioners. We have to keep going, and we have to learn from our clients' experiences. And I'll tell you this, Max, I put up a poll on my stories recently, and I said, when you graduate as a dietitian or a nutrition professional, how prepared were you to see clients that day? 0 people said they were prepared to see clients. Hundreds of people answered. And the answer is that the experience of working with people as a practitioner is what gives you your knowledge. Like we learn so much more from our clients than we could ever give them. And witnessing someone and watching them change and watching how their body reacts to things makes you realize that nutritional research is not really that important outside of the context of real human beings.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. Well, Michelle, thanks for coming out.
No, thank you for having me.
Yeah, this was so fun.
I've been following you since the Facebook days, Max. When you had anchovies in your bag as you were traveling, you were like, I'm bringing these anchovies with me. I'm like, it's 2014. This guy's cool. What is he doing?
Well, yeah, sardines. And yes, I don't do that so much anymore because now I just I'll throw like beef jerky in my bag.
You don't need like 10 cans of fish on you at all times. I mean, anymore.
No, I don't. I'll eat them at home. I love sardines, but no, yeah. Generally these days, I found a really good brand of beef jerky. When I was in London last year, I spent quite a bit of time in London, and I found a brand of beef jerky that I felt absolutely in love with, better than anything I've had stateside. Called Billy Frank's.
Oh, never heard of it.
I have no affiliation.
Do we have to go to London, all of us, and get it?
Yeah, I mean, whenever I'm in London, I stock up, and now I'll order from them from their website, and I pay an exorbitant amount for shipping, because they're shipping it from London. But apparently, it was founded by some Texas
of course.
born, yeah,
they got the meat right.
Entrepreneurs, yeah, who now live in London, expats from the U.S. living in London, and they created this line of beef jerky called Billy Frank's, and they have some like really interesting flavors.
That's all you need now. You don't need your sardines and your anchovies in your bag.
No, it's so good. It's all grass fed, and yeah, I mean, I'm always traveling with snacks, beef jerky, whole fruit. I always bring like whole fruit.
Oh yeah, I bring like an avocado, and I'll bring like some weird gluten-free cracker, and I'm like making it on the airplane with my weird hard-boiled eggs. It's brutal.
I love it. Well, travel. I mean, eating on the road, like keeping up with your health goals on the road can be tricky, but yeah, I love having like some packaged ready to go. Absolutely. Yeah, and beef jerky is the bomb. Love it. Thanks for coming out. Before I ask you the last question that gets asked to everybody on the show, how can people support you? Where can they find you on social media?
Yeah, I'm Michelle Shapiro RD on social media. I have a podcast called Quiet the Diet. It's about quieting both the diet noise and quieting the anti-diet noise to just actually listen to yourself, because that's what's most important. And I work with clients one-on-one. I have a team of amazing practitioners who do that too.
Amazing. What does living a genius life mean to you?
I think it means living in a truly authentic way and listening to what you need, and then also, more importantly, living amongst our neighbors and in community. And like there is no love like the love of the people around us, and there is no being a genius without love.
Well said. Beautifully put. Thanks again. Hey, if you liked that video, you need to check out this one here, and I'll see you there.